This is video 5 for chapter 7-8 on the skeletal system in anatomy and physiology. In this video, we're going to look at the lateral view of the skull, which is a little bit more involved. So the anterior and lateral views are pretty intense because there's a lot of bones and they all come together with different sutures and different features. So with this, we have a lot more bones involved. So we have the parietals, the occipital, the maxilla, sphenoid, temporals, zygomatic, and the mandible as the main bones. There are a couple other ones that we could see, but we'll look at them in a different view. Now, the temporals have a pretty unique reason why they're called temporal. Temporal literally means related to time. And these are at the temples. And the thought is that it was named this because this is one of the ways to tell how old somebody is by looking at their hair color. The temple area, the hair there, is usually one of the first ones to turn white or gray. So that's how that is named. Now with this, we're going to look at this view, and this view is a little bit bigger because we have a lot more detail in this. And we're going to go ahead and start looking at the names of these bones. So here we have the frontal, the parietal, the occipital, and then we have the temporal. And I'm going to have to draw a couple things on here. So this bone right here is the sphenoid. Bone J right here that goes here and meets up with the temporal, that is the zygomatic. L is the maxilla, and down here we have the mandible. So those are the major bones that we are going to be identifying on this view. And if you notice, we also have here the coronal suture labeled. We have the lambdoidal suture. And we have one more suture that we're going to identify, and that is this suture right here between the parietal and the temporal. This is the squamous suture. So here we have those. And we are going to be identifying a couple different features. So we are going to identify the mastoid process, the external auditory meatus, the styloid process. Just know that, and then we will talk about that in another view that's a little bit more prominent, but it is right there. And then the temporomandibular joint. So with that, let's move back to our notes now that we have the things. Anything that's not marked over here on this view, you are not responsible for. So if we go back and look at these features, the first thing that we have is the squamous suture. This is between the temporal and parietal. So we would have these on both sides of the skull. The external auditory meatus is the opening for the ear canal. And it helps transmit sound waves into the middle ear, the middle and inner ear. Now, mastoid, that is the bump. So if you feel right behind your ear and move down towards the earlobe, you'll feel like a rounded process right there. And that is an air-filled cavity. And the reason it's called mastoid, oid means like, mast refers to breast. So this means breast-like. So somebody felt that and said, well, that's a bump and it's shaped like a breast, so that's what we're going to call it. And this is an air-filled cavity. And it assists with sound waves. So this air-filled cavity within there helps with almost like an echo or reverberation of sound waves. And you can actually put a tuning fork that's struck behind there and you'll be able to hear it because you can transmit sound waves through the skull. This is also a muscle site attachment. We have a couple bones that we haven't talked about before. And the sphenoid means that it's wing-like. That's what that means. And when we look at an exploded view of the bones, and you'll be able to see what each bone looks like by itself, that is going to be more prevalent. This is a very odd-shaped bone, and it almost looks like one of those ink blots that people say looks like a bird or a bat. The zygomatic bone is what we commonly call our cheekbone. So underneath your eye, if you feel that and you go across and like halfway between your eye and your ear, you feel that structure. This right here is prominent, and that forms your cheekbone across. And that goes right above your ear opening and connects with the temporal bone, about right past your eye socket. Your maxilla is your upper jaw. And there's actually two of them that meet in the frenulum. The frenulum is that little divot that you have right under your nose. And between your two incisors, on your top incisors, your two front teeth, that is where the joint is between your two maxilla. And we'll talk about that more in the anterior view. The mandible is the lower jaw. And we'll see that again in the anterior view also. But we have two parts to the lower jaw. We have the body, which is the front part or the chin. And we have what is called the ramus, which is the angled part towards the ear. So if we look at our diagram again, down here would be the body, and then you can see right here that we have this angled part. This is called the ramus. And part of this goes up underneath the zygomatic, and another part resides in this joint right here called the temporomandibular joint, because it attaches the temporal and the mandible. That is sometimes abbreviated as the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint. And some people have a disorder in which that joint is slightly defective and it clicks whenever they move their jaw up and down. Or some people have a lot of pain in that area. Also, if your jaw is dislocated, that can slip out of that joint and I would imagine that would be a very painful dislocation. Now, if you do fracture this bone, they basically wire your jaw shut. And they don't do that with putting wires between these two like stitches. They will put braces on your teeth and then wire the top and bottom braces on the teeth together so you cannot move this joint. And you basically have to drink stuff through a straw.